Dr. Mara Calloway had been chief of obstetrics at Hargrove Whitfield Medical Center for 3 years when Dorothy Voss arrived on a gurney. It was 11:47 on a Thursday night in November. The paramedics came through the bay doors fast, wheels locked, one EMT calling out the vitals, the other holding the IV line clear of the stretcher rails. I was already at the nursing station reviewing a post-op chart when I heard the name on the radio handoff. Voss, Dorothy, 71 years old. Ischemic stroke, suspected left hemisphere, Glasgow coma scale at 11 and dropping. I set the chart down. My senior resident, Dr. Felix Arajo, was already moving toward the bay. I let him take the first 30 seconds. I needed those 30 seconds to stand very still and understand what I was looking at, not medically, but in every other sense. Dorothy Voss was my mother-in-law. She was the woman who had sat across a kitchen table from me 10 years ago, slid a piece of paper across the wood surface, and told me to sign it. She was the woman who had said, in front of her son and her sister and the family attorney, that I was not competent to make decisions for myself or my child. She was the woman who had looked at my 6 months pregnant body and told me I had no business pretending I understood anything about medicine. I pulled on my white coat. I walked to the bay. She didn't recognize me. Her left side wasn't tracking, but I recognized her. I recognized the ring on her right hand, garnet, gold setting, always worn on the wrong hand because she said the left one was for people who needed to advertise. I recognized the way her jaw was set even in distress, tight and forward, like she was already arguing with someone who wasn't there. I looked at the chart number. HW 2024 114471. I signed my name at the bottom of the intake form. My hospital. My call. Hello, everyone. Before I go any further, if you have ever had someone tell you that you were too small, too quiet, too inexperienced to deserve a seat at the table, and then you went and built the table yourself, please leave a comment. I want to hear your story. I read every single one, because this story is about exactly that. And it did not happen quickly, and it was not clean, and there were years, real years, the kind that grind, where I wasn't sure I was going to make it to the other side of it. But to understand why that November night meant what it did, I have to take you back. 10 years back, to a kitchen table in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, and a piece of paper that was supposed to end everything for me. It didn't. I was 29 years old when I married Garrett Voss. I was in my second year of residency at Clennon University Hospital, obstetrics and gynecology, working 80 hours a week and loving every exhausting minute of it. Garrett was a project manager at a civil engineering firm. He was steady and warm, and he made me laugh, which felt like a miracle after the years I had put into medical school. We got married in June, small ceremony, 12 people. His mother stood in the front row in a cream-colored dress and an expression that suggested she was attending something she had not fully consented to. Dorothy Voss had an opinion about everything, and her opinions arrived fully formed, with the certainty of someone who had never needed to revise one. She had opinions about how I cooked, how I kept the apartment, how often I called Garrett during my overnight shifts. She had opinions, specifically and frequently, about my career. "You're going to burn yourself out before you're 35, she told me the first Thanksgiving after our wedding. We were standing in her kitchen, the kind of kitchen that had a designated drawer for bread twist ties. Women in medicine always do. They try to have everything and they lose the things that matter. I asked her what things she thought mattered. She looked at me like I had asked her what color the sky was. Family, she said. Presence, being there. I nodded and went back to slicing the sweet potatoes. By the time I became pregnant, 8 months into my third residency year, her opinions had sharpened into something more structured. She had decided that my commitment to residency was incompatible with responsible motherhood, and she had communicated this to Garrett in a series of conversations I was not included in. I found out about most of those conversations secondhand, weeks later, in the way you piece together a picture from the wrong side. The paper came out in February. I was 6 months pregnant. The baby's kicks had a schedule, most active at 10 in the morning and just after dinner. I had started keeping a small log of them in the margins of my patient notes. Garrett had asked me to come to his mother's house for dinner. His aunt, Patricia Holt, was there. And the family attorney, a man named Stuart Finch from Finch and Molero Associates in Dublin, Ohio. He sat at the corner of the table with a leather portfolio and said very little. Dorothy put the document in front of me between the salad and the main course. It was, she explained, a family health coordination agreement. It outlined that during my pregnancy and for 12 months postpartum, All major medical decisions regarding my prenatal care and the care of the child would require consensus approval from herself and Garrett. She framed this as a supportive structure. She used the phrase, "We just want to make sure everyone is protected," 3 times in 4 minutes. "You're exhausted, Mara," she said. "You're working too hard to be thinking clearly about this. A doctor shouldn't be making decisions about her own pregnancy. There's a conflict of interest. You know that." I looked at Garrett. He was looking at the table. "This isn't enforceable," I said. I kept my voice level. I had learned in residency that the most dangerous thing you could do in a room full of people who wanted you to lose control was to stay completely calm. A private family document has no standing over medical decision-making authority. Stuart Finch cleared his throat and said that the document was meant to be more of a relational framework than a legal instrument. He said it twice, which told me that Dorothy had asked him to say it. "Then I don't need to sign it," I said. "Mara." Dorothy's voice dropped into a register I had not heard from her before. Slower, deliberate. "Garrett and I have discussed this. If you want to continue living in the house that his family helped purchase, and if you want to remain part of this family's financial structure during your maternity leave, you will sign this. We are not asking." There it was. The house. Garrett and I had taken a $112,000 contribution from his parents toward the down payment on our home 18 months earlier. Dorothy had presented it as a gift at the time. At the dinner table in February, with a document in front of me and a family attorney in the corner, I understood what the word gift had always meant to Dorothy Voss. It meant leverage. I looked at the document for a long time. Patricia Holt was looking at her wine glass. Stuart Finch was looking at his portfolio. Garrett was still looking at the table. I signed it. I signed it because I was 6 months pregnant and exhausted, and because I had $22,000 in my own savings account and a residency stipend that did not cover rent in Columbus without Garrett's income. I signed it because I calculated, in the seconds I had, that fighting that battle in that room on that night was not the battle I needed to win. I signed it. I excused myself to use the bathroom. I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for 2 minutes, a trick a senior resident had taught me for resetting the nervous system in high-stress situations. I looked at myself in the mirror. I thought about the GYN program at Hargrove Whitfield Medical Center. I had seen it listed in a graduate medical education directory 3 months earlier, one of the most competitive specialty training tracks in the Midwest, affiliated with the medical school at Alderton University. I had looked at it for a long time and then closed the directory because I hadn't been ready to want something that large. Standing in Dorothy Voss's bathroom on that February night, I got ready. I dried my hands. I went back to the table. I ate dinner. I thanked Dorothy for the meal. I drove home and I wrote the name of the program on a piece of paper. I folded it and put it in my wallet. I kept it there for 6 years. The baby came in April. Her name was Simone. She was 6 pounds, 4 ounces, and she arrived at 4:18 in the morning, which I noted was a perfectly reasonable hour for someone who intended to be a serious person. I was back in residency 8 weeks later, which was the minimum leave my program allowed, which was also 8 weeks more than Dorothy thought was appropriate, and approximately 4 weeks less than she had declared I would need to recover properly. Simone's first specialist appointment, a routine pediatric cardiology screen for a minor murmur the delivery team had flagged, was conducted by Dr. Priya Namber at Columbus Children's Specialty Group. Dorothy had opinions about Dr. Namber's office hours. I filled out the medical records forms myself and scheduled all follow-ups through the clinic's patient portal without consulting anyone. The murmur resolved by Simone's 4-month checkup. Dorothy did not acknowledge this. I finished my residency in June of the following year. I was 31 years old. I had a board-eligible OB-GYN credential, a daughter who had learned to pull herself upright using the edges of furniture, and a marriage that had become, over those 18 months, something I was examining very carefully. Garrett was not a cruel man. I want to be precise about that because precision matters. He was a man who had been raised to avoid conflict by absorbing it into compliance, and his mother had been teaching him that lesson since childhood. He was not capable of standing in a room with Dorothy and choosing a different direction. I had watched him try exactly once, at Simone's first birthday, when Dorothy had announced in front of 12 guests that she would be handling the child's medical insurance enrollment through the family's group plan rather than through my hospital benefits, and I had watched the attempt collapse in under 4 minutes. I did not attend to that particular defeat immediately. I was managing 3 others. The application to the Hargrove Whitfield specialty track was due in September. I worked on it at night after Simone was asleep, at the kitchen table, with the paper from my wallet unfolded and pressed flat beside my laptop. The program required letters of recommendation from 2 attending physicians and 1 department head. I had the attending letters. Dr. Susan Fry at Clennon had been my strongest advocate through residency, a woman who had the productive impatience of someone who had been underestimated by enough people to have stopped tolerating it in others. But the department head letter was a problem. Dr. Harold Kessler, Clennon's GYN chief, had written recommendations for 3 other residents that cycle. I had not asked him. I did not think I had earned it yet. I requested a meeting with Dr. Kessler on a Tuesday morning. I brought my case, my clinical evaluations, my procedure logs, a summary of a patient safety protocol I had developed in my 3rd year for postpartum hemorrhage response time. I laid it out in 12 minutes. I had rehearsed it to 12 minutes because I knew he had 13. He read the protocol summary. He looked up. "You wrote this in your 3rd year," he said. "Yes, while you were on the overnight rotation. And on 2 lunch breaks." He wrote the letter. The rejection came back in October. The program had accepted 6 candidates that cycle. I had been the 7th-ranked applicant. There was no wait list. I sat in my car in the hospital parking structure and read the email 3 times. The 3rd time I read it, I was already calculating whether I could apply again in the next cycle if I added a research component to my application. The answer was yes, if I could attach myself to an active study within the next 4 months. Dr. Fry knew a researcher. She always knew someone. Her name was Dr. Yolanda Mbeki, a maternal-fetal medicine specialist running a longitudinal study on preeclampsia outcomes at the Alderton University School of Medicine, the same institution affiliated with the Hargrove Whitfield program. Dr. Fry made a call. I met Dr. Mbeki for coffee on a Wednesday in November. By the end of the meeting, I was listed as a contributing clinical investigator on a study that would eventually be cited in 11 journal articles. I reapplied in September of the following year. I was accepted. I did not tell Dorothy. I told Garrett in the car on the way home from a grocery run, quietly, in the same tone I would use to mention a schedule change. He said that was great. He asked what it would mean for our weekends. I told him we would figure it out. We did not, as it turned out, figure it out. But that is a different part of the story. The Hargrove Whitfield Advanced Specialty Training Track in Maternal-Fetal Medicine ran for 2 years. I began in January. Simone was 3 years old. We had moved. I had negotiated this move carefully, over several months, with the particular precision required when you are restructuring a living situation while also restructuring a marriage, into an apartment in the Lakeview district of the city, closer to the hospital, farther from Dorothy's suburb. Garrett had agreed to the move. He had also, around the same time, agreed to a trial separation that was his idea in name and mine in practice. I want to be clear, the end of that marriage was not Dorothy's fault, and it was not entirely Garrett's fault. It was the fault of 2 people who had wanted different things and had found slowly that they were incapable of wanting the same ones. Garrett needed a life that ran in predictable patterns. I needed to become something. Those are not incompatible desires, but we had managed to make them incompatible. The divorce was finalized in March of my 1st year in the specialty track. We used a mediator. There was no family law attorney on either side initially. We had agreed on the broad terms ourselves, and the mediator, a woman named Carol Beaumont from Beaumont Dispute Resolution, helped us formalize them. Garrett was reasonable about custody. I was reasonable about the house. We split the equity down the middle, which meant that I received $56,000, and he received the closer proximity to his mother, which I understood was the thing he had always been negotiating for without knowing it. I put $40,000 of that towards Simone's college fund and kept the rest in a money market account on the advice of a financial advisor I'd met through a hospital wellness seminar. A careful, unhurried man named David Osai at Alderton Wealth Partners, who had the useful quality of never telling me what to do, only what the options were. Dorothy called me twice the week after the divorce was finalized. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was about the college fund. She had heard from Garrett that I had opened one, and she wanted to know who was managing it. The second message was about Simone's upcoming pediatric specialist check and whether I had verified that the correct insurance policy was in place. She used the phrase health insurance coverage 4 times in a 90-second message. I did not call her back. I did not need to. I was no longer part of a structure where Dorothy Voss's calls required a response. I focused on the work. The specialty track was organized around 3 clinical rotations: high-risk prenatal management, intrapartum complication response, and postpartum critical care, each 12 weeks long, with a research requirement threaded throughout. My supervising physician was Dr. Emmett Acaffer, Director of Maternal Fetal Medicine at Hargrove Whitfield, a tall, methodical man from Lagos who had completed his own training in London and arrived in the Midwest with a clinical rigor that had never adjusted for regional standards. He expected precision. He communicated this expectation by asking questions rather than giving instructions, and he had a way of asking a question that made you understand exactly where your reasoning had broken down without ever pointing directly at the fracture. In my first rotation, during a complex preeclampsia presentation that escalated to HELLP syndrome over 6 hours, I made a call on the timing of delivery that was 40 minutes earlier than Dr. Acaffer would have made it. We discussed this after. He asked me to walk him through my decision tree. I did. At the end, he said, "Your reasoning was sound. Your threshold is lower than mine. I am not certain mine is better. Watch the next 3 cases and tell me what you notice." I watched the next 3 cases. I wrote a 6-page analysis. He read it overnight and came back with 2 questions, both of which I could answer. "You're going to be good at this," he said. Not warmly, he was not a warm communicator, but with the particular flatness that in Emmett Acaffer was equivalent to enthusiasm. I completed the specialty track in December. The credential added to my board certification was maternal fetal medicine subspecialist, the formal designation for what the field sometimes calls a perinatologist. The day the paperwork was processed, I was standing in the break room of the MFM unit at Hargrove Whitfield, eating a sandwich I had made at 5 in the morning, when Dr. Acaffer appeared in the doorway and told me the department was posting an attending position and that he expected me to apply. I applied. I was hired. On the day I signed my attending contract at Hargrove Whitfield, February 14th, which was either a meaningful coincidence or the universe having a specific sense of humor, I went home to the apartment and I sat on the floor of Simone's room while she slept. She was 4 years old. She had her father's eyelashes and my stubbornness, and she slept with both arms flung wide, like she was holding the whole bed accountable. I sat there for a long time. I thought about the kitchen table in Columbus. I thought about the document with my signature on it. I thought about Dorothy Voss's voice saying the words conflict of interest. I thought about Stuart Finch and his leather portfolio and his carefully neutral expression. I didn't feel victorious. I felt precise, like a measurement that had finally come out right. There was a moment, around 9 o'clock that night, when I picked up my phone and almost sent Garrett a message. Not for any sentimental reason, I was well past sentiment where Garrett was concerned, but because I had this irrational impulse to say, I made it. I wanted someone who had known me in that kitchen in February to know that I had made it. I put the phone down. I didn't send anything. They didn't need to know. And more importantly, it wasn't time. The 7 years between my attending hire and that November night move in my memory the way years in the middle of something serious always move, not as a sequence of events but as a texture, dense, specific in patches. The work was the constant. The work at Hargrove Whitfield, in the maternal fetal medicine unit, and then increasingly across the entire department of obstetrics, became the structure around which everything else was organized. Simone grew. She started school. She had a phase with dinosaurs that lasted 2 years and was completely neuronic. She developed, by age 8, an unnerving ability to tell when I was tired versus when I was troubled, which was more perceptive than most of my residents. I kept her medical records organized in a binder: pediatric specialist visits, vaccination logs, therapy sessions when she was 7, and adjusting to the new school after we moved apartments, with the same care I gave my clinical documentation. Her insurance policy was reviewed annually. Her health insurance coverage was never a question. Whatever else I had failed to protect in those earlier years, I had protected that. Professionally, the years had their own architecture. In my 3rd year as an attending, I published a peer-reviewed paper with Dr. Mbeki and 2 Alderton researchers on preeclampsia biomarker patterns in first-time mothers over 32. The paper was cited 47 times in 18 months and earned me an invitation to present at the Maternal Fetal Medicine Society's annual conference in Philadelphia. I presented on a Thursday morning to a room of 300 physicians. I had prepared for it the way I prepared for everything, by assuming nothing and verifying everything. Dr. Acaffer was in the front row. He nodded twice during my data section. For him, that was a standing ovation. In my 5th year, I was appointed clinical lead for high-risk obstetrics, not yet department chief, but the role that functioned as the operational center of the unit. I managed case assignments, supervised 7 residents, and sat on the hospital's patient safety committee. I also began consulting on complex cases referred from outside the Hargrove-Whitfield network. Cases that came with fat paper files and insurance policy complications and specialist appointment backlogs, and the particular kind of desperation that accumulates when a patient has been moved between systems too many times. On the consulting cases, I worked regularly with a colleague named Dr. Priscilla Wren, attending in maternal medicine, 10 years my senior, a woman who had trained at Johns Hopkins and settled in the Midwest because, she said, she preferred winters with honest intentions. Priscilla knew everything about me that mattered. She knew about the kitchen table and the document and the divorce and the years of building in silence. She had extracted this information over a series of after-shift conversations in the break room and had never once offered advice I didn't ask for, which was the quality that made her trustworthy. "They still don't know," she asked me once, in the break room on a Tuesday over terrible vending machine coffee. "No," I said, "she considered this. Do you think you'll tell them?" "Eventually," I said, "at the right moment." "And when is the right moment?" I thought about it. "When I can't be argued with," I said. She looked at me for a moment and then she nodded, and she drank her terrible coffee, and she did not bring it up again until I brought it up first. The promotion to chief of obstetrics came in the fall of my 8th year at Hargrove-Whitfield. The process had been formal: a national search, external candidates, 2 rounds of interviews with the hospital executive committee. Dr. Acaffer had written a letter of support that was, by his standards, effusive. The committee chair, a hospital administrator named George Tallman, called me into his office on a Wednesday morning and shook my hand and told me that the committee's decision had been unanimous. I called Priscilla from the parking garage. "They picked you," she said immediately before I said anything. I had never determined how she did that. "They picked me," I confirmed, "chief of obstetrics." "Yes." There was a pause. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. I thought about the piece of paper in my wallet, carried for 6 years, and then retired to a drawer when I no longer needed the reminder. I thought about standing at Dorothy Voss's bathroom sink with cold water on my wrists, calculating what I had and what I needed and what I was going to build when no one was watching. "I feel correct," I said. Priscilla laughed, a real one, sudden and warm. "Correct," she said. "Mara Calloway, you are genuinely something." I was, by then, 39 years old. Chief of obstetrics at Hargrove-Whitfield Medical Center, 42 beds, 11 attendings, 3 MFM fellows, and a maternal outcomes record that had placed us in the top quartile of Midwest academic medical centers for 4 consecutive years. My name was on the department door. My name was on the hospital's physician directory. My name was, theoretically, findable by anyone with an internet connection and a reason to look. Dorothy Voss had never looked. I knew this because Garrett had mentioned it once offhandedly at a custody handoff, the way Garrett always handled information he wasn't sure I wanted, that his mother had asked whether I was still doing the doctor thing. He had told her yes. She had said she supposed that was good for Simone. She had not asked for specifics. 3 years passed. And then, on a Wednesday in October, 13 days before she arrived on my gurney, Priscilla appeared in my office doorway with a piece of paper. A referral. High-risk consultation, request from St. Ambrose Regional Medical Center, 2 counties over. The patient had been flagged for complex cardiovascular history. The attending there had noted a recent TIA, transient ischemic attack, often a precursor event, and was requesting a specialist assessment. Priscilla had seen the name before she brought it to me. That was why she was standing in the doorway instead of sliding it under my door. The patient name on the referral was Dorothy Voss. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked up at Priscilla. "She's in their system," I said. "Not ours yet." "Not yet," Priscilla agreed. I set the referral on my desk. I did not pick up the phone. I did not contact St. Ambrose. I did not reach out to Garrett, though I could have. The referral was information, clinical information, arriving through legitimate channels, and I was not required to act on it until she was in my system. I had come that close to everything surfacing before it was time. But it wasn't time yet. 13 days later, the gurney came through my bay doors at 11:47 on a Thursday night, and Dorothy Voss's chart number was HW 2024 114471, and my name was already on the intake form. It was time. The gurney went into Bay 3. I followed at the pace I always follow, a critical, deliberate, 2 steps behind the resident, watching the patient's face rather than the monitors, because the monitors tell you numbers and the face tells you trajectory. Dorothy's face told me she was frightened. That was new. In all the years I had known her, she had occupied every room with the certainty of someone who had pre-approved the space. Frightened was not an expression I had catalogued for her. I catalogued it now. Dr. Arajo had her on the stroke protocol. He ran through the assessment efficiently. He was one of my best residents, methodical and unshowy, the kind of resident who would be a very good attending and a quietly excellent chief somewhere in a decade's time. I let him work. I stood at the foot of the bed with her chart on the tablet and I read. The TIA in October. The referral from St. Ambrose that Priscilla had brought me. A follow-up that had apparently been scheduled and then postponed twice, because Dorothy had decided that a second opinion at a different institution was unnecessary. Her primary care physician at St. Ambrose had documented both postponements with the particular careful language physicians use when they need the chart to show that they told the patient and the patient declined. I recognized that language. I had written it myself. There was a note in the St. Ambrose file, transferred over in the digital records handoff, from a nurse practitioner who had spoken with Dorothy in September. Patient declines specialist appointment at this time. States she will coordinate through family. I thought about that phrase, coordinate through family. I thought about what that had meant to Dorothy all her life as a governing principle. The bay curtain shifted. A man walked in, mid-40s, Garrett's height, same set to the jaw. Garrett's younger brother, Neil Voss. I had met him 6 times over the course of my marriage, and remembered him as someone who agreed with Dorothy on all matters related to family governance and disagreed with her on nothing, which made him less a person than an extension of a position. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at Dr. Arajo. Then he looked at me. "Are you the doctor on this case?" he asked. "The chief of obstetrics," I said. "I'm also the senior physician on duty for this admission. Dr. Arajo is your mother's attending resident. He'll be coordinating with our neurology team." Neil Voss looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face, recognition, maybe, or the beginning of it. Then it was gone, replaced by the default expression he'd always worn around me, polite and slightly dismissive, the look of a man who had categorized you and found the category satisfactory. "Okay," he said. "I'd like to speak with someone about her care plan. Who do I talk to about decisions?" I looked at him. I kept my voice at exactly the register I used for any family member in any bay, warm, professional, giving nothing away. "Let's get her stabilized first," I said. "We'll do a family meeting once the imaging comes back, usually 2 to 3 hours. He nodded. He took out his phone. He went to make a call. I turned back to Dorothy's chart. Internally, I was already 3 steps ahead of the conversation that was coming. The imaging would take 2 hours. The neurology consult would take another 40 minutes. The family meeting would happen in Conference Room B, which was on my floor, under my department's administrative authority in my hospital. I called Priscilla at midnight. I told her who was in Bay 3. "I know," she said. She had seen the admit on the system. "What do you need?" "Pull the original MFM file from the Clennon transfer," I said. "And the department intake from when I joined Hargrove Whitfield. I want everything in a physical file on my desk before the family meeting." "It'll be there," she said. There was a brief pause. "Mara," she said. "I know," I said. "You've had 10 years. 11, technically. Are you ready?" I thought about the piece of paper I had carried in my wallet for 6 years. I thought about standing at Dorothy's bathroom sink with cold water running over my wrists. I thought about the contract I had signed at Hargrove Whitfield on February 14th, 8 years ago, with Simone asleep in the next room and the quiet feeling of something becoming correct. "I've been ready since Columbus," I said. I signed the first document at 12:34 that morning, the official clinical authority designation for Dorothy Voss's inpatient care, which placed her case under my department's oversight and my professional sign-off. There was no going back. The next 36 hours were the calmest I had experienced in years. This is the thing people misunderstand about preparation. It does not make you tense. It makes you quiet. Every action has already been decided. You are simply executing a sequence. I slept 4 hours at the hospital. I was back on the floor by 6. The imaging had come back at 1:20 a.m. Left middle cerebral artery territory ischemic stroke, moderate severity, motor and language function affected. Dorothy was conscious, but her speech was slowed, and her right side was weak. She knew where she was. She knew who Neil was. When she looked at me, I was not certain whether she knew who I was. I did not ask. The neurology attending was Dr. Constance Ife, a colleague I had worked alongside for 4 years, a precise and unsentimentally compassionate physician who had the useful quality of being unimpressed by everything except good clinical reasoning. She briefed me at 6:45 in the hallway outside Dorothy's room. "She's medically stable," Constance said. "The question is rehabilitation pathway and long-term care planning. That conversation needs to happen today." "I know," I said. "Family meeting at 2. Constance looked at me for a moment. I had told her some months back the broad outline of who Dorothy Voss was in my history, not in detail but enough. Constance had listened and asked one question. "Is your objectivity intact?" I had told her yes. She had accepted this and had not raised it again, which was her way of signaling that she trusted me and also that I would be accountable if I was wrong. "Your objectivity intact?" she asked now in the hallway. "Completely," I said. She nodded and handed me her consult notes. Priscilla had the file on my desk by 7. It was a thick one. Inside, my original residency credentials from Clennon, my specialty track completion record from Hargrove Whitfield, my attending contract from February 14 years ago, my appointment letter as clinical lead, and the letter from George Tallman confirming my appointment as chief of obstetrics. Behind those, the family coordination agreement Dorothy had put in front of me in Columbus. My signature at the bottom. Stuart Finch's notary stamp. I had requested that document from the county records office 4 months ago, after the referral from St. Ambrose had landed on my desk. I had filed the request through a family law attorney named Raymond Chu of Chu and Harker Family Law Associates in Columbus. A referral from Carol Beaumont, the mediator who had handled my divorce, who had told me that Raymond was the person to call when you needed something done carefully and without announcement. Raymond had retrieved the document and confirmed in writing what I had always known. The family coordination agreement was legally unenforceable. It had never had standing. It was a piece of paper with my signature on it and no mechanism of authority. He had also confirmed something I had not known. Stuart Finch had left Finch and Molero Associates 3 years after our dinner in Columbus. The firm had been dissolved. Finch was not licensed to practice in Ohio. He was now a real estate agent in Scottsdale. I read Raymond's memo again, sitting at my desk at 7 in the morning, and I felt something settle into place, the last piece of a structure that had been assembling itself beam by beam for 11 years. I called Raymond. "She's here," I said. "In your hospital. Admitted last night, ischemic stroke, family meeting today at 2. There was a brief pause on his end. "You want me available by phone?" "Yes, between 1 and 2. "I'll clear my calendar," he said. I went back to the floor. At 11:30, I was reviewing a post-op chart at the nursing station when my phone showed a text from an unfamiliar number. The message read, "This is Neil Voss. I understand you'll be running the family meeting today. I want you to know that my mother has a designated healthcare proxy on file. Her wishes have been documented, and we have an estate attorney who will be available by phone during the meeting. We expect her care decisions to be handled by the family." I read the text twice. I set the phone down. I picked up the phone and typed back, "Thank you, Mr. Voss. We'll see you at 2. I pulled Dorothy's full file. There was no healthcare proxy on file, not in the Hargrove Whitfield system, not in the transferred records from St. Ambrose. If one existed, it had not been submitted to any medical institution Dorothy had interacted with in the past 4 years. I made a note of this. I added it to the physical file on my desk. That was the moment I understood exactly how much they had underestimated me. At 12:45, I stopped by the staff break room. There was a patient there, not mine, not in a clinical context, but a woman I had treated 18 months earlier, a high-risk pregnancy case that had required 3 months of intensive monitoring. Alina Sousa. She was visiting a friend on a different unit and had wandered to the break room for coffee. She recognized me and stood up. "Dr. Calloway," she said. "I don't know if you remember." "I remember," I said. "Alina, how is she?" Her face changed the way faces change when you ask about a child. "She's 2 now," she said. "She's loud and she won't stop running. She paused. She's here because of what you did. I looked at her for a moment. She's here because you came in when you did, I said, and because you trusted the process. Alina smiled. Is that what you call it? That's what I call it, I said. I poured my coffee. I went back to my office. I had a family meeting to run. Raymond Chu had emailed me a one-page summary by 1:45, the legal status of the Family Coordination Agreement, the procedural authority of a hospital chief of department in care decision conflicts, and the specific Ohio statute governing healthcare proxy validity requirements. I read it once. I folded it and put it in the physical file. I picked up the file and walked to conference room B. The room was mine before anyone else arrived. I had made sure of that. I had arranged the chairs, myself at the head of the table, Dr. Constance Ife to my left, Priscilla Wren to my right. The hospital's patient liaison, a composed and experienced woman named Margaret Holloway, was at the far end. The department administrator, Kevin Tran, sat near the door with a laptop. The hospital's general counsel representative, an attorney named Susan Park from Hargrove Whitfield's legal team, sat beside Kevin. She had been briefed. She had reviewed Raymond's memo. 7 chairs along the sides for family. Neil Voss arrived first at 1:59. He was followed by a woman I recognized from old photographs as Dorothy's sister, Patricia Holt, the same Patricia who had sat at the Columbus kitchen table studying her wine glass. Then 3 other relatives I didn't recognize. Then Garrett. I had known he might come. He was still Dorothy's son, and Dorothy was in a hospital bed. He walked in and saw me and stopped walking for approximately 2 seconds. Then he recovered and took a seat. He looked older than I expected, which was reasonable since 11 years had passed. He looked like someone who had spent those years very much inside his own life, which was probably accurate. He didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to him. A 6th family member arrived, a man in his late 50s who introduced himself as Warren Holt, Patricia's husband. And then, at 2:04, a phone was placed on the table by Neil. He pressed a button and announced that his mother's estate attorney, a man named Arthur Billings of Billings and Crane Associates in Columbus, was joining by phone. Thank you all for coming, I said. My name is Dr. Mara Calloway. I'm Chief of Obstetrics at Hargrove Whitfield Medical Center and the senior physician overseeing your mother's admission. I'll be chairing this meeting. I watched Neil's face process the word chairing. This is a family meeting, he said. This isn't a medical board thing. It's a care planning meeting, I said. Standard protocol for all patients admitted at this severity level. The hospital conducts it. I chair it. That's how it works. Arthur Billings's voice came from the phone on the table. I'd like to note for the record that Dorothy Voss has a designated family decision-making structure in place. We'll get to that, I said. I kept my voice at its clinical register. First, Dr. Ife is going to walk us through Mrs. Voss's current medical status and the care options in front of us. Constance was efficient and clear. She spent 8 minutes explaining the stroke, the prognosis, the rehabilitation pathway options, and the long-term care considerations. She spoke the way good physicians speak in family meetings, directly, without softening the facts into vagueness, but also without the clinical coldness that makes families feel processed rather than heard. I watched the family while she spoke. Patricia Holt had her hands folded on the table. Garrett was looking at his own hands. Neil was taking notes on his phone. When Constance finished, Neil looked up. Our position, he said, is that major care decisions should be made in coordination with family. My mother has expressed this preference clearly. Has she documented it? I asked. She has documents. Has she filed a healthcare proxy with any medical institution she's interacted with in the past 4 years? A pause. That documentation will be forthcoming. It needs to be on file prior to its exercise, I said. That's Ohio law. Mr. Billings, can you tell me where the healthcare proxy document is currently filed? Silence from the phone. Mr. Billings. The document was drafted, Billings said carefully, and is in the process of being. It has not yet been filed with a medical institution. Then it has no active authority in this setting, I said. Mrs. Voss is a competent adult whose speech has been impacted by her stroke but whose cognitive function is intact. Her care decisions are hers to make. Where she requires clinical guidance and where she cannot communicate, they fall to her treating physician team under hospital protocol. That is this team. Neil set his phone down. You can't just, Mr. Voss. I kept my voice level. I understand this is a difficult situation. It is also a clinical one, and in this room, in this institution, the clinical process governs. I opened the physical file. want to address something that was raised in a text message I received this morning, as well as in Mr. Billings's opening remark, the suggestion that there is an existing family decision-making structure with legal authority over your mother's medical care. I slid the first document across the table toward Neil. It was the Family Coordination Agreement from Columbus. My signature at the bottom. The date, February, 11 years ago. This is a document I signed 11 years ago, I said. You may recognize it. It was presented to me as a family health coordination agreement governing medical decision-making during my pregnancy. Neil looked at it. Patricia Holt looked at it. Garrett looked at the wall. That document was produced under legal consultation from a notary and attorney associated with your family, I said. Stuart Finch of Finch and Molero Associates. I have verified, through independent legal review, that the document was never legally enforceable. It had no standing over my personal medical decision-making authority and has no standing now. But I'm not raising it for its legal force. I'm raising it because it establishes a pattern. That was the first document. I had 3 more. Neil's pen was no longer moving. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not anger, he would get to anger, but the particular stillness of a person recalibrating at speed. The second document, I said, and placed it on the table. A printed record from Raymond Chu's legal memo, summarizing the unenforceability of the Columbus Agreement and the dissolution of Finch and Molero Associates. This is a legal assessment of the Columbus Agreement prepared by Raymond Chu of Chu and Harker Family Law Associates. It confirms what I told you at that dinner table in Columbus 11 years ago. The document had no authority. This is completely irrelevant to, Neil began. Let me finish, I said, not sharply, just clearly. The same voice I used when a resident started to interrupt a patient. It worked on residents, it worked now. The third document. I placed my chief of obstetrics appointment letter on the table. George Tallman's letterhead, the date, my name in the salutation. This is my appointment as Chief of Obstetrics at Hargrove Whitfield Medical Center. I have held this position for 3 years. Before that, I was clinical lead for high-risk obstetrics in this department for 4 years. Before that, I was an attending physician in maternal-fetal medicine for 4 years, trained through this institution's specialty track and credentialed at the subspecialty level. I have been practicing medicine in this building, in various capacities, for 11 years. Patricia Holt put her hand over her mouth. Garrett made a sound, not a word, just a sound, something that might have been the beginning of my name. Neil's voice, when it came, was quieter than before. You're the chief here. Yes, I said, you've been the chief here for 3 years. Yes, and you didn't. I was not required to disclose my professional position to my former in-laws, I said. I was required to do my job, I have done it. Arthur Billings's voice came from the phone. This doesn't change the question of Mrs. Voss's care planning preferences. Mr. Billings, said Susan Park, from her seat near the door. It was the first time she had spoken. Her voice was unhurried and had the particular quality of institutional authority speaking at half volume. The hospital's position is documented and consistent with Ohio statute. We're happy to provide your office with the relevant sections after this meeting. Billings was quiet. I placed the fourth document on the table. It was a printed summary from Dorothy's medical records, the St. Ambrose chart, the TIA documentation, the twice-postponed specialist appointments, the nurse practitioner's note. Patient declines specialist appointment at this time. States she will coordinate through family. Your mother declined 2 specialist appointments in the months before the stroke, I said. The referrals were appropriate. The postponements were her choice. I am not placing blame, I am establishing context. She is here now. The care she needs is specific. It is time-sensitive, and the decisions that need to be made are medical ones. This team will make them, in consultation with Mrs. Voss where she is able to participate, and under hospital protocol where she is not. I closed the file. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people are absorbing more than they expected to absorb. Margaret Holloway, the patient liaison, spoke carefully. We do want to make sure the family has every opportunity to be involved in a supportive capacity. That's important to us. The clinical decisions and the supportive involvement are 2 separate tracks and both matter, I nodded. Agreed, Dr. Ife will walk you through the rehabilitation options. You will have full access to update meetings. Your voices matter in this process. The clinical authority structure is simply not what you believed it was. Neil put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment, then he looked at me. Did she know? He asked. His voice was different now. Smaller. When she was admitted, did she see you and know who you were? She was non-responsive to faces on admission, I said. She may have registered something, I don't know. He nodded slowly. Something that might have been grief moved across his face, not for the conflict, I thought, but for his mother lying in a hospital bed 30 feet from where we sat, with a weakened left side and slowed speech and a decade of decisions that had brought her here. Is she going to be okay? He asked. Her prognosis for significant recovery with appropriate rehabilitation is reasonably good, I said. She's strong, she's been strong her whole life. I meant it. Accuracy requires that you mean it. Garrett finally looked at me. He looked at me for a long moment. I returned his look steadily, without warmth and without coldness, the way you look at someone who is important to you for a specific period of time in a specific chapter, and who is now a person you share a daughter with, which is a relationship of its own kind. He said, I'm sorry, Mara. I know, I said. I closed the meeting at 3:18 p.m. Dorothy Voss was transferred to the rehabilitation unit 4 days later, under a care plan developed by Constance Ife and reviewed by my department. Her recovery was slow and genuine. By March, she was walking with a cane. By June, her speech had largely returned. I saw her once in the hallway in February, 3 months after her admission. She was in a wheelchair heading to a physical therapy session. Her PT aide, a young man named Carlos, was pushing the chair and telling her something that was making her smile. She saw me. She was clear-headed by then. I could see the recognition. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, Mara. Dorothy, I said, another moment. You're the chief here, she said. Yes, I said. She looked at me with an expression I had no category for. It was not apology. I don't think apology was in Dorothy's vocabulary at any register, but it was something adjacent to it. A recognition, an accounting. How long? She asked. 3 years as chief, I said. 11 years at the hospital. She looked at the floor, then she looked back at me. Your mother must be proud, she said. It was, I think, the closest she could get. I accepted it as what it was. She is, I said. Enjoy your PT. I walked back to my office. That was 14 months ago. Dorothy completed her inpatient rehabilitation in April and transitioned to an outpatient program at a facility in her county. Her long-term prognosis is good. She uses a cane. She has, by Garrett's account at a recent custody handoff involving Simone's school schedule, resumed attending her book club and having opinions about everything, which I consider a satisfactory outcome for all parties. The Family Coordination Agreement from Columbus is in a folder in my desk drawer. Raymond Chu has a copy. I have no plans to do anything further with it. It served its purpose, not as a legal instrument, which it never was, but as evidence of a pattern that needed to be named in a room. It has been named. The room has moved on. Neil Voss sent me a text 3 weeks after the family meeting. It read, I didn't know who you were, I should have asked. I'm sorry for how that meeting started. I thanked him and told him his mother was receiving excellent care. He has not contacted me since, which I think is the appropriate distance between people who have acknowledged a thing and agreed to move forward from it. Garrett and I are what we have always been since the divorce, 2 people raising a 12-year-old who has her father's eyelashes and my stubbornness, and her own very particular personality that belongs entirely to herself. Simone wants to be a marine biologist. She also wants to be a chef. She has announced that she sees no contradiction. I have told her she is correct. Her college fund, last I checked with David Osai, is in excellent shape. Her insurance policy has never lapsed. Her medical records are organized in a binder that has now expanded to 2 binders, because she is 12 and 12-year-olds have more history than 4-year-olds, which is either obvious or remarkable depending on the moment. She has been to therapy. We did a year of sessions when she was 9, working through some anxiety that had developed around school transitions, and she came out of it with tools she still uses. She is, by every measure I know how to apply, okay. Better than okay. Priscilla retired in August. We had dinner to market, just the 2 of us, a restaurant downtown with good bread, and a wine list she had been planning to work through for a year. She gave me a small framed print for my office, a botanical illustration of a plant with very deep roots and a very small flower. No inscription. She said the image was the inscription. I have it on the wall to the left of my desk, between my board certification and my appointment letter. I am 39, no, 40 now. My birthday was in September and Simone made me a cake and put exactly 40 candles on it, which required 2 rounds of lighting because the first round couldn't sustain itself. I thought that was either a bad omen or a very good metaphor, and I decided it was the latter. I am still chief of obstetrics at Hargrove Whitfield. I intend to be for a while longer. Dr. Akafor retired 2 years ago. The new director of the MFM division is a former fellow of mine named Dr. Adiz Okonkwo, who is sharper than I was at her stage and considerably less patient, which I mean as a compliment. She's going to run something large someday. I have told her so. She has told me she knows. I think about the kitchen table in Columbus sometimes. Not often, and not with the weight it used to carry, but I think about it. I think about the $22,000 in my savings account and the piece of paper in my wallet. I think about Dr. Fry calling Dr. Mbeki. I think about Dr. Kessler reading my protocol summary and asking if I had written it in my 3rd year. I think about the parking structure at Clennon, where I sat and read the rejection letter and was already calculating the next application before I reached the bottom of the email. I think about Dorothy's bathroom sink and cold water on my wrists. I do not think of those years as the years I was wronged. I think of them as the years I was building, and the wrongness was simply the friction that made the building feel necessary. I am not certain I would be who I am without the resistance of those years. I don't say that to forgive anyone for anything. I say it because it is accurate, and I have always preferred accuracy. The conflict was real. The document was real. The $112,000 was real, and the leverage it was used for was real. I am not rewriting that into a gift. It was not a gift. It was a demonstration of how power functions when it is held by people who believe their version of care entitles them to your compliance. But I am still here, and I built something they couldn't see coming, in the years they weren't looking. And if there's anything this experience taught me, it's this. 1. What people dismiss about you is often the precise map of what you are meant to master. Build there, quietly, for as long as it takes. 2. Documentation is not distrust. It is the difference between having the truth and being able to prove it in the room where it matters. 3. The most powerful thing you can do with someone else's low ceiling is refuse to live under it, build your own structure, and let your work be the only argument you ever need to make. Was I wrong to spend 11 years building in silence, to never once tell Dorothy or anyone in that family what I had become, and to let the confrontation happen on my terms, in my hospital, instead of offering them the chance to know me before they needed me? Tell me in the comments. If this story gave you strength, hit that like button. It means more than you know.